Today, my Blu-ray pick of the week is David Lean's 1962 Academy Award-winning epic Lawrence of Arabia. Starring Peter O'Toole as the legendary T.E. Lawrence, Omar Sharif, Alec Guinness, Anthony Quinn, Claude Rains, and Jose Ferrer. This is probably my favorite film of all time, and I think it's because I've watched it so much, I know the camera moves, and my obsession with it increases. Especially when a new historical epic comes out, or when some famous director does a historical epic, they immediately cite Lawrence of Arabia and David Lean. And it's the influence of this film, whether conscious or unconscious, is there in a lot of films, and especially in films that are historical epics after this one came out. I think there was a clear dividing line between this historical epic and what came before with the films of Cecil B. DeMille. The first turning point was William Wyler on Ben-Hur. Lawrence took the idea of a historical epic and really had you get inside the head of the main character. I remember I got this for Christmas of '89. It finally came out on VHS. The restored version was shown in 70mm in 1989, restored by Robert Harris with David Lean's full cooperation, because David Lean was still alive, and over the years people had edited the film and the original negative was thought to be lost, and David Lean finally got involved, and finally he decided he wanted to make his own personal director's cut. But I got this film for Christmas of '89, and I became fascinated with anything that had the word epic on it. This is supposed to be an epic. Well, I can't wait to see this. And I had already seen Gone with the Wind. I already owned The Godfather, but that Christmas season, that holiday season, I asked for Lawrence of Arabia and Apocalypse Now. And for me, it was interesting how this film in 1962, shot in 70mm, with one of the grandest scores ever composed by Maurice Jarre, and Apocalypse Now were so much alike. Lawrence of Arabia tells the story of T.E. Lawrence and his exploits in Arabia. How he was brought there just to observe, but how he, just by his sheer will and ego's important here, to rid Arabia of the Turks. He befriends in the movie Ali, played by Omar Sharif, who is a member of the Harith tribe, convinces them that the Turks are in Aqaba, which they are. The Turks were in Aqaba, but in order to get there, they had to cross the land, going through the harsh Nefu desert. But out of that would come the Hawittat tribe, and there's no way they could say no to them. And at first they do, but they really eventually come together to get the Turks for their own personal reasons. In the case of the Anthony Quinn character, who plays the head of the Hawittat tribe, his obsession for money, T.E. Lawrence was right. He created a miracle. He got the Turks out of Aqaba. Now, if this film was made nowadays, that would be the climax of the film. You'd have a 2-hour and 20-minute film. That would be the climax, and a scroll would come up at the end of the film. Over the next couple of months or years, T.E. blah 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 did this, but no. One of the visual motifs in Lawrence of Arabia is this desert landscape. There's no CGI here, folks, in this movie. This desert landscape, and how a human figure or a couple of human figures look this small, dwarfed against this huge expanse. When you see this film on the big screen, and I finally saw it several weeks ago in a beautiful 4K digital package, it was beautiful. You see how this translates on the big screen. Even when you watch it widescreen on your 16:9 television on Blu Ray or whatever, seeing it on the big screen is the way to go. You see these human figures looking like ants in this huge canvas. And that's when you realize that the desert is also a character in here. And how the desert is sort of transforming the T.E. Lawrence character. And how by the end of the first act, because this was presented as a roadshow film, as all epics were back then, with an overture and an intermission. By the end of the first act, he's starting to believe his own hype. And he's also starting to believe other things about his character that shocked him. Namely, how he feels towards killing. When I saw the scene when he goes back to Cairo and has the meeting with General Allenby, played by Jack Hawkins, and he says his reaction to how he had to execute somebody in the tribe to avoid a war, a tribal bloodbath. His reaction shocked me for a film in 1962. And that's when the camera begins to tighten. The expansive stuff is no longer there, and you really start to get into the head, and David Lean and his screenwriter Robert Bolt try to peel away the layers of who this T.E. Lawrence character is. So by the beginning of part 2, Alec Guinness, who plays Prince Faisal, and Arthur Kennedy, who plays the news reporter who is loosely based on Lowell Thomas. T.E. Lawrence starts to promote himself and using the news reporter to promote himself as a myth, until he's finally captured by the Turkish Bey. What happens there? T.E. Lawrence says it in his book, and David Lean tastefully implies it here. Lawrence of Arabia is a brilliant film. It's an epic film. Thousands of extras, beautiful 70mm photography, shot by the great Freddie Young in Super Panavision 70. Thousands of extras. This doesn't have too much in the way of visual effects, because even in Ben-Hur, they had their version of CGI to extend extras back then. But the desert is real. It was shot on location in the Arabian desert, and Spain, in Seville, Almeria, and then in Morocco. Seville for all the city scenes. Peter O'Toole plays him as not a hero. He plays him flamboyant and confused, and not the sort of portrayal that you would have for somebody in the middle of a historical epic. To me, Lawrence of Arabia was the birth of what you had with the modern film epic. After Lawrence of Arabia, you have Kubrick with 2001: A Space Odyssey and Barry Lyndon. You had Coppola with The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2. You had Scorsese with Raging Bull, which I do consider an epic, and Goodfellas. You had Spielberg with Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Schindler's List and Empire of the Sun. These epic films that at the heart of the story is a personal story, a personal inner canvas of a character. And that was what I think David Lean did with this film. That's a big contribution. He puts somebody at the center of an epic that by the end of the film, it doesn't end with a big battle. It doesn't end with a big emotional climax. It ends with a dazed T.E. Lawrence on the road to the ship to take him back to England. He was promoted colonel, looking for a friendly face on the road, and nobody's there. And the driver of the Jeep just says, "Well, sir, going home." And he looks at him confused. "Home, sir." And it just ends with a vague close-up of Lawrence through a sandy windshield. A long fade-out to the famous Lawrence theme done by Maurice Jarre. The way David Lean captures the heat of the desert, too. It's not just with the big canvas. He also, of the big canvas landscape of the desert on a 70mm screen, he does it with these complicated zoom shots, these complicated pan shots, where sometimes the camera pans away before a character actually moves into that shot, as if the camera is dazing because of the heat. And the famous mirage scene, where Omar Sharif's character appears out of a mirage, done with a huge, long lens. He really makes you feel the daze of being in heat for a long time. This is the 50th anniversary box set. on Blu Ray. And this is the original Roadshow program. When you went to see this in 70mm back in the day, on a big screen, you would get a program with details and pictures of the film and full credits. So this is the original Roadshow program that you got passed out with the film. Lawrence of Arabia is a film that I recommend. It's a long film, but so what? There's an intermission. It's rewarding to watch. Definitely get the Blu Ray. They did a new 4K restoration on it. If it's showing at a theater near you, like in my area, there's Harkins Theaters that does Tuesday night classics, and that's where I saw it. I made it a point to see it. It is a treat. It is one of the greatest visual wonders of cinema, in my opinion. My Blu Ray pick of the week, David Lean's 1962 Oscar-winning epic, Lawrence of Arabia. And until we meet again.